please make welcome Brian Akers.
Good morning. So I'm going to talk to you about something this morning that is very important to me, and that's suffering. So those of you who've never experienced suffering, feel free to check your text messages or do whatever it is that you do while other people are suffering. But this morning I'm going to talk about suffering, and as a young adult, suffering I've discovered. Oh, and I was asked after the first service, I was asked, how long are you going to claim to be a young adult? I said, as long as nobody calls me on it. So, as a young adult, there's a lot of expectation going into being a young adult. You graduate high school, you're beginning your life, you're doing your thing. There's a lot of things, there are a lot of opportunities to not achieve what it is that you feel is required of you to achieve in order to be successful. And so, when I talk about suffering, as far as from the perspective of a young adult, I'm talking about just not getting it. I'm talking about suffering being something that can be labeled in a bazillion different ways, but at the end of the day, what it really does is just suck. It doesn't feel good. It's an immediate indicator of when you're suffering is when you don't feel good. And, as a metaphysician, there's even, you kind of compound that sometimes, because as a metaphysician, I know that, everything is rainbows and puppy dogs. And so because I know that, it's easy to start to suffer and then to realize that you shouldn't be suffering. And then, oh, I can't be suffering. Why am I suffering? And now you're suffering because of your suffering. But do you see the cycle that exists within the chain of suffering? And what I want to talk to you about this morning is how to reach out and grab your suffering and embrace it so that cycle ends. The question is, everybody, we're talking about the rainbows and puppy dogs, and I like to talk about rainbows and puppy dogs a lot because in this teaching and many other teachings, you hear a lot about the rainbows and puppy dogs. But what a lot of people fail to mention or fail to get into and talk about is everything else. Now we know that in this philosophy, and we believe in this philosophy, excuse me, that God is all that there is, that it's an omnipotent force, that it's absolute presence, absolute love, absolute grace, absolute beauty. And so we know that this is omnipotent, meaning it's in everything. It is all that there is. And so as we know that this is all that there is, at what point do you stop and acknowledge that this includes your suffering? This includes, if it is an experience that is being had here, if it is something that is happening in your life, if it is something you are living right now, you are living the life of God, and God has suffering. Can you embrace that? It's easy when you're in this space with powerful people who are ready to hug just squeeze the love out of you. It's easy to be in that space of absolute knowing of the truth. The question is, when your suffering comes, from where do you approach it? When suffering is present in your life, do you approach it with the same smile, the same open arms? Do you approach it with the same kindness in which you approach the center, in which you approach one another, or in which you approach your children, the people that you love, your lover, those people in your life that you cherish? Are you bringing that same idea, feeling, concept into your suffering? As we speak, there's a parking lot full of about 40-some-odd teenagers right now that are headed off to a place that is meant to kind of be like the training wheels for their suffering. and that's really what it is. It's a space for them to experience what I'm talking to you about today, which is to turn that suffering into an embraced blessing of your life. And my question to you, everyone in this center, is, are you setting an example for them that will allow them to become more powerful practicing metaphysicians in their life? And so my challenge to you today is not only to know that suffering is God, and not only to embrace your suffering and to answer the call, but to understand that as suffering comes rapping on your door, that is the finger of God pushing that doorbell, calling you to a higher place where you practice your kindness, where you practice your love, where you practice your faith in a real way, in a new, more challenging and exciting experience in your life. And you have it within each and every one of you to accomplish that. And I honor that in you. Thank you.